My wife's sister said, "You don't belong on this trip." She erased my name from the guest list, replaced me with her new boyfriend. At boarding, she smirked, "Go home." Everyone looked away, even my wife, but then the crew turned to Mu Epsilon and said, "Welcome aboard, owner." Look, I'm not saying I'm the kind of guy who checks his phone first thing in the morning like some sort of digital masochist, but after 40 years on this planet, you develop certain survival instincts. Coffee first, existential dread second, social media third. It's a system that's kept me relatively sane through 2 career changes, 1 mortgage refinance, and a wife who thinks just 5 more minutes means half an hour every single morning. So there I was, sitting at my kitchen table on what should have been a perfectly unremarkable Tuesday, cradling my second cup of coffee like it was the last life preserver on the Titanic, when my phone lit up with the kind of notification that makes your stomach drop faster than your credit score after buying furniture you definitely can't afford. Instagram. The Hell's Cape where everyone's life looks better than yours, where avocado toast is a personality trait, and where my sister-in-law Sabrina Preston posts updates about her life with the frequency and enthusiasm of a propaganda minister. I should have kept scrolling. I should have put the phone down, finished my eggs, maybe read the news like a normal human being who enjoys blood pressure in the normal range. But no, I clicked. The photo loaded with that annoying little spiral thing, and then boom, there it was. Champagne glasses catching the sunlight just right. Designer sunglasses reflecting what I immediately recognized as the marina where our yacht was docked, and a caption that might as well have been written in neon lights. Family yacht tradition, here we go. Clinking glasses sailboat sparkles, can't wait to spend quality time with the people who matter most. The people who matter most. Let that one marinate for a second. Now, here's the thing about family yacht traditions. They're fantastic when you're included in them, and they're absolute psychological warfare when you're not. And judging by the fact that my wife Lauren, who is currently upstairs doing whatever mysterious 45-minute morning routine she does that I'm not allowed to ask about, hadn't mentioned anything about a yacht trip, I was getting a sneaking suspicion that I fell into category B. I scrolled through the comments like I was investigating a crime scene, which, let's be honest, I basically was. "So excited," said Aunt Patricia, who once told me at Thanksgiving that my job sounded very functional. "Can't wait, sis," commented Lauren's cousin Melissa, who pronounces it Melissu because regular pronunciation is apparently too pedestrian. And then, like a cherry on top of a sundae made entirely of condescension, there was Blake. Blake, with his perfectly coiffed hair that probably requires more product than a small salon, his 3-day stubble that I'm 90% sure he maintains with an actual stencil, and his bio that lists him as a crypto entrepreneur and digital asset visionary. Translation: he's unemployed but owns a laptop and watches a lot of YouTube videos about Bitcoin while pretending the word blockchain is a substitute for having an actual skill set. "Looking forward to making memories with my favorite people," Blake had commented, complete with a bicep emoji and a boat emoji, because apparently, we've reached a point in human evolution where pictographs are making a comeback and nobody consulted me about it. My favorite people. I wasn't even his least favorite person because I wasn't a person on his radar at all. I was furniture. No, scratch that. Furniture gets noticed. I was that generic wall art you find in hotel rooms. Present but entirely forgettable. I sat there, coffee getting cold, eggs getting colder, watching the likes roll in from people I'd spent countless holidays with, people I'd made small talk with about weather and real estate values, and whether quinoa was really worth the hype. And not one of them had thought to mention, "Hey Darren, you coming on the yacht trip?" Because here's what I was slowly realizing as my breakfast congealed into a depressing metaphor for my social status. I wasn't coming on the yacht trip. I'd been edited out, photoshopped out of the family portrait, replaced by Blake, the crypto bro with commitment issues and a watch collection he definitely talks about at parties. I heard Lauren's footsteps on the stairs, that particular rhythm that meant she was checking her phone while walking, a skill she'd perfected that I'd given up trying to replicate after nearly breaking my neck twice. She walked into the kitchen looking like she'd just stepped out of one of those Instagram posts where everyone's skin glows like they're sponsored by the sun itself. "Morning," she said, pouring herself coffee from the pot I'd made 40 minutes ago because apparently, I'm also the household barista. I decided to test the waters with the subtlety of a man who'd just discovered he'd been uninvited from his own life. So, I said, gesturing vaguely with my fork at a piece of toast that had lost all will to live. Are we packing swim trunks or emotional baggage this year? Lauren blinked at me. That slow blink that meant her brain was trying to load a response while simultaneously calculating whether playing dumb or coming clean was the better strategy. It's the same look she gives me when I ask if she remembers where she put my keys, and we both know she moved them, but she's deciding whether admitting it is worth the effort. What do you mean? She asked, which was already a bad sign because she knew exactly what I meant. I turned my phone around, showing her Sabrina's post in all its glossy, excluding glory. The yacht trip, I said. You know, the family tradition that's apparently happening. This weekend. The one nobody mentioned to me. Lauren's face did that thing where it tries to stay neutral, but her eyes betray her like a bad poker player. Oh, she said, and that single syllable contained more information than a full confession. Oh, that. The list still being finalized. The list still being finalized. That's corporate speak for, you're not on it, champ, but we're going to pretend there's still hope until the last possible second so you don't make a scene. I nodded slowly, setting my phone down with the careful precision of a man who was choosing not to throw it across the room. Right, I said. Still being finalized. In the finalization process. Pending final finalization. Darren, she started, using that tone that meant she was about to explain something to me like I was a particularly slow golden retriever. No, I get it, I interrupted, standing up and carrying my plate to the sink, because if I was going to have an existential crisis, I was going to have it while maintaining basic kitchen hygiene. Logistics are complicated. Guest lists are hard. It's tough to remember to include your husband on your family's yacht trip. These things happen. That's when I knew, with the kind of clarity that only comes from profound betrayal and cold eggs, that this wasn't just an oversight. This wasn't some innocent scheduling mix-up or a case of too many people and not enough cabins. This was deliberate. This was Sabrina, the self-appointed CEO of the family who'd never met a hierarchy she didn't want to climb or a person she didn't want to rank, making a statement. And that statement was, Darren Coley, you don't belong here. I looked out the kitchen window at our perfectly suburban street, where nothing interesting ever happened and everything was exactly as mediocre as it appeared, and I thought, okay then, if this is war, quiet, polite, passive-aggressive, extremely well-catered war, then I guess I better start strategizing. Because here's something Sabrina didn't know about me, something none of them knew. I might be moderately employed and perpetually underestimated, but I didn't get to 40 by rolling over and accepting whatever scraps people threw my way. If you've never experienced the specific kind of rage that comes from being professionally gaslit by a family member via text message, let me tell you, it's a unique flavor of fury that sits somewhere between finding out your favorite show got canceled and discovering someone ate your clearly labeled leftovers from the fridge. Except worse, because at least canceled shows don't send you passive-aggressive emojis afterward. It was noon when my phone buzzed. I was at work, sitting in my office at the logistics company I'd built from scratch 15 years ago, trying to focus on a spreadsheet that was actively making me question my life choices, when Sabrina's name popped up on my screen like a villain's entrance in a movie where you already know the plot twist, but it still makes you want to throw popcorn at the screen. The text read, Hey Darren, just realized we didn't reserve a spot for you. Total mix-up, clinking glasses, hope you understand. I stared at that message for a solid 30 seconds, reading it over and over like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense, something that didn't make me want to respond with a string of words that would definitely violate workplace communication standards even though I was texting on my personal phone. Just realized. Like this woman woke up that morning, looked at her meticulously planned guest list that probably had color coding and contingency plans, and suddenly went, oh my goodness, did we forget Darren? Silly us. And that emoji, that champagne glass emoji sitting there like a little alcoholic period at the end of her lie. That woman uses emojis like they're holy water to bless her sins, like adding a tiny cartoon picture somehow makes the statement less insulting. Sorry we're excluding you from your own family. Clinking glasses, hope you're not too devastated. Sparkles, please don't cause a scene. Folded hands. I showed the text to Marcus, my business partner who shares the office next to mine and has witnessed enough of my family drama over the years that he should probably qualify for hazard pay. He read it, looked up at me, and said, "Man, that's cold. That's like Arctic tundra cold. That's the kind of cold that gives other cold things hypothermia." "Right," I said, pacing around my office like a tiger in a cage that's specifically designed to be too small and also insultingly decorated. She acts like this is some booking error at a Holiday Inn. Like she didn't personally orchestrate my exclusion. Marcus leaned back in his chair, which squeaked because we keep saying we're going to oil it, but never do. Much like how people keep saying they'll include me in family events, but never do. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I said, which was partly true. The fully formed plan hadn't crystallized yet, but I could feel it taking shape in my brain like a storm cloud gathering momentum, getting ready to rain on someone's parade. Specifically, Sabrina's parade. Then, as if the universe decided I hadn't been punched enough times today, my email dinged. It was from Wavecrest Charter Services, the company that managed the yacht. The subject line read, "Reservation Modification Confirmation." I opened it with the kind of dread usually reserved for opening medical bills or texts from your dentist's office reminding you that you've been ignoring that cleaning appointment for 8 months. "Dear Mr. Coley, this email confirms that the cabin reservation under your name has been canceled as of today at 10:47 a.m. Cancellation processed by S. Preston. If you have any questions regarding this modification, please contact us directly. S. Preston." Sabrina Preston. She'd actually gone into the system and canceled my reservation herself. This wasn't a mix-up. This wasn't an oversight. This was premeditated exclusion with a paper trail. I did what any reasonable person would do in this situation. I printed that email. Printed it on the nice paper we save for important client contracts. I slid it into a manila folder that I labeled, in my neatest handwriting, "Future Karma." Then I filed it in my desk drawer right next to the folder labeled "Tax Documents" and the one labeled "Reasons I Need Therapy." Marcus watched this entire process with the fascinated concern of someone observing their friend slowly lose their mind in real time. "You're building a case file," he said. "I'm documenting a pattern of behavior." I corrected him, which sounded way more legal and less unhinged. "Right," he said slowly. "And what exactly are you planning to do with this documentation?" "I don't know yet," I repeated, but this time it felt less true. The plan was starting to form, taking shape like one of those Magic Eye posters from the 90s where if you stared long enough, suddenly a dolphin would appear. Except instead of a dolphin, I was starting to see justice. Or revenge. Honestly, at this point, I'd settle for either. The rest of the workday passed in a blur of passive-aggressive email responses and distracted meetings where I nodded along while internally plotting. By the time I got home, I'd mentally rehearsed approximately 17 different confrontation scenarios, ranging from calm and rational to completely unhinged, with several stops in between. Dinner that night was salmon. Lauren made salmon because she'd been on this health kick ever since her coworker Stephanie started doing CrossFit and wouldn't shut up about macros. I sat across from her at our dining room table, the same table where we'd hosted her family for countless holidays, where I'd listened to Sabrina's stories about her luxury vacations and her important business meetings and her theories about why people who don't drink green juice are basically committing slow suicide. Lauren poked at her salmon with her fork, scrolling through her phone with the other hand in that way that people do when they're trying to look casual but are actually avoiding conversation. The silence stretched out between us like a bridge neither of us wanted to cross. "So," I finally said, because apparently I'm the one who always has to break the uncomfortable silences in this relationship, "I got an interesting text from your sister today." Lauren's fork paused mid-poke. "Oh, yeah," I said, pulling out my phone and reading the message aloud, complete with verbal description of the emoji. "Total mix-up," she says. "Can you believe that? A mix-up." Lauren set down her fork and her phone, which meant this was serious because she never voluntarily stops looking at her phone during dinner. "Maybe it was a mix-up," she said, but her voice had that quality that meant even she didn't believe what she was saying. I laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that has no humor in it, the kind that's just air being forcefully expelled from your lungs in a way that mimics joy but is actually its opposite. "Yeah," I said, "and maybe my hairline's just on vacation. Maybe it's coming back any day now with a tan and stories about finding itself." Lauren didn't laugh. She didn't even crack a smile. She just sat there looking at me with those eyes that I used to think were beautiful, but in that moment just looked tired. Tired of me, tired of the drama, tired of having to choose between her husband and her family, and wishing there was a third option where she didn't have to choose at all. Darren, she started, and I knew whatever came next was going to be some version of "don't make this a big deal," or "it's not worth fighting over," or my personal favorite, "you're being too sensitive." But I didn't want to hear it. I was done hearing it. I was done being the reasonable one, the one who let things slide, the one who showed up to family events with a smile and a bottle of wine and pretended I didn't notice when Sabrina introduced me to her friends as Lauren's husband instead of by my actual name. "I'm done," I said quietly, and the words felt good coming out, felt like opening a window in a stuffy room. "I'm done begging for invitations to my own life." That's when I decided it. Right there, over disappointing salmon and even more disappointing company. I wasn't going to fight to get on that yacht. I was going to do something so much better. Before we go any further, let's clear something up because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I'm some kind of freeloader, some guy who married into money, and now I'm bitter that the gravy train doesn't stop at my station anymore. You're thinking I'm mad because I got excluded from something that was never mine to begin with. And honestly, I don't blame you for thinking that, because that's exactly the story Sabrina's been selling for years. But here's the plot twist that's about to make this whole situation go from mildly entertaining to absolutely chef's kiss perfect. That yacht? The one they're all so excited to sail on. The one Sabrina calls the family yacht, with the same possessive pride she uses when talking about her Peloton or her timeshare in Cabo. Yeah, that boat is mine. Legally, financially, 100% mine. Let me take you back about 7 years, back when I actually believed that working hard and building something meant you'd get respect. Cute, right? I was 33, running my logistics company that I'd started in my 20s with money I'd saved from working 2 jobs and eating ramen. So often I'm pretty sure I temporarily turned into a noodle. The company was doing well, not by a private island, well, but by a really nice boat, well, and that's exactly what I decided to do. See, I grew up landlocked in Ohio, where the closest thing we had to a yacht was someone's uncle's pontoon boat that smelled like fish and regret. I'd always dreamed of having a boat, a real boat, the kind you see in movies where people drink champagne and pretend their problems don't exist because they're surrounded by water and expensive teak wood. So when the business started turning serious profit, when we landed that contract with the regional distribution center that basically tripled our revenue overnight, I thought, this is it. This is my moment to buy something absolutely impractical and completely amazing. I found her at a boat show in Newport. A 58-foot azimuth, sleek and white and beautiful in that way that expensive things are beautiful, where you know you're looking at concentrated money in physical form. The broker, this guy named Craig who wore too much cologne and had the kind of tan that comes from either a beach house or a tanning bed, and I suspected it was the latter, walked me through every detail. The master stateroom, the guest cabins, the fly bridge with its panoramic views, the salon that looked like it had been decorated by someone who'd watched too many episodes of Below Deck and thought, yes, I want that, but more. Lauren was with me that day, and I remember her face when she saw it. Pure joy. The kind of joy that made me think, yeah, this is worth every penny I'm about to spend, because I'm making my wife happy, and isn't that what marriage is about? Supporting each other's dreams, even when those dreams are shaped like a boat and cost more than most people's houses. We bought it. Well, I bought it. The money came from my business account, from profits I'd earned by spending countless nights doing inventory reports and route optimizations, and all the deeply unsexy work that goes into running a logistics company. Craig congratulated me, shook my hand with the enthusiasm of a man who'd just earned a massive commission, and handed me paperwork that I was too excited to read carefully. That was mistake number 1. My accountant, Jerry, who's a good guy but has the personality of unflavored oatmeal and the communication skills of a brick wall, suggested putting Lauren's name on the papers. Tax purposes, he said, pushing his glasses up his nose in that way that accountants do when they're about to say something boring but important. Joint ownership, better filing options, estate planning, blah blah blah. I should have known right then that easier taxes often leads to harder life lessons, but I was too busy being excited about owning a yacht to think about the potential complications of shared ownership with someone whose family treats me like an inconvenient houseplant. So we signed it together. Both our names on the deed. Joint ownership. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine, and let's sail off into the sunset together forever and ever, amen. Here's what happened next. Lauren's family found out we bought a yacht. And suddenly, it wasn't Darren and Lauren's yacht. It became the family yacht. Sabrina, who'd never contributed a single dollar to the purchase, who probably couldn't tell you the difference between a bow and a stern without consulting Google, started referring to it as our yacht in conversations. We should take the yacht out this summer, she'd say. The yacht needs new cushions in the salon, she'd announce, like she was personally invested in its upkeep. At first, I thought it was just semantics, just family being family, wanting to feel included in something nice. And honestly, I didn't mind sharing. I liked hosting them, liked playing captain, liked the way Ophelia, Lauren's mother and the family matriarch, would sit on the deck with her wine and actually smile at me like I was a person and not just furniture that occasionally required feeding. But here's the thing about giving people access to your stuff. They start to believe it's their stuff. They start to feel entitled to it. And Sabrina? She took that entitlement and ran with it like it was an Olympic sport and she was going for gold. She started planning trips without consulting me. Started inviting people I'd never met. Started calling the marina and making reservations using the Preston family yacht as the vessel name. Even though Preston was her maiden name and hadn't been relevant since she married that hedge fund guy who left her for his personal trainer 3 years ago. I brought it up to Lauren once, about a year after we bought it. We were sitting in our living room, and I said, as casually as I could manage, "Hey, so your sister's been calling the yacht the family yacht a lot lately. Should we maybe clarify that it's, ours? Like, specifically ours?" Lauren looked up from her book, some self-help thing about finding your authentic self, which I always thought was funny because if you need a book to find yourself, maybe you're looking in the wrong places, and said, "Does it really matter? Family is family. What's the big deal about sharing?" And that should have been my second warning sign, right there. The idea that sharing had become the default, that my ownership didn't matter because family is family, like blood relations somehow trumps legal documentation and the fact that I'd paid for the entire thing. But I let it go because that's what I do. I let things go. I'm the human embodiment of pick your battles, except I never actually pick any battles. I just let them all walk past me while I stand there holding my sword and wondering why nobody respects me. Fast forward to now, to Sabrina's text message and her strategic cabin cancellation and her blatant exclusion of me from a trip on my own boat. And suddenly, all those years of letting it go felt like the dumbest strategy I'd ever employed. Jerry, my accountant, called me that afternoon. Perfect timing, really. "Hey, Darren," he said in his monotone accountant voice that suggested he found numbers more interesting than human emotion, which he probably did. "Just reviewing the yacht documentation for the quarterly review. Everything's still good with the joint ownership?" "Actually, Jerry," I said, and I could feel the plan solidifying in my mind like cement. "I need you to pull all the original documentation. Purchase records, payment receipts, everything showing where the money came from." There was a pause. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's about to be very okay," I said. "I just need to remind some people who actually owns what around here. Because here's the truth that Sabrina had conveniently forgotten, that the whole family had somehow overlooked in their rush to treat my property like a community asset. The yacht was bought with my money, from my business, with my hard work. Lauren's name might be on some papers, but the boat was mine in every way that actually mattered. So when Sabrina booted me off my own boat, when she canceled my cabin and replaced me with Blake the crypto bro, she wasn't just excluding me from a family trip. She was writing the final scene of her own downfall, and she'd handed me the pen to write it with. There's a special circle of hell reserved for people who have to watch their own exclusion play out in real time on social media, and I'm pretty sure it's located somewhere between the circle for people who chew with their mouths open and the one for drivers who don't use turn signals. It's a uniquely modern torture, watching people celebrate something you're deliberately not part of, and they're doing it publicly, performatively, like they want to make absolutely sure you know you're not invited. It was Thursday evening, 3 days before the yacht trip was scheduled to depart, and I was doing what any self-respecting man in his 40s does when he's avoiding his problems. Sitting on the couch, drinking a beer that cost too much because it had some fancy label with a deer on it, and scrolling through social media like I was conducting archaeological research into human stupidity. That's when I saw the notification. Sabrina Preston is live. And because I'm apparently a glutton for punishment, or maybe because I genuinely wanted to see how much worse this situation could get, I clicked on it. The video loaded with that annoying buffering circle that makes you question why you're paying for high-speed internet, when it's clearly neither high-speed nor particularly good at interneting. Then the image cleared, and there they were. The entire Preston family, plus various hangers-on and plus-ones, gathered around a table at Marcello's, this Italian restaurant downtown that thinks putting truffle oil on everything makes it worth charging $40 for pasta. The table was one of those long ones that makes everyone look like they're at the Last Supper, except instead of Jesus in the middle, there was Sabrina, holding court like she was hosting a TED Talk about how to be insufferable. The lighting was perfect, too perfect. Actually, the kind of perfect that meant someone had specifically requested a table with good lighting for social media purposes, which told me this whole dinner was basically a photo op with breadsticks. I could see Lauren sitting 3 seats down from Sabrina, laughing at something Ophelia had said, looking beautiful and completely comfortable and absolutely not like someone whose husband had been deliberately excluded from a family event. Next to her was Blake, because of course Blake was there, wearing what looked like a linen shirt that probably cost more than my car payment, and sitting with that casual confidence of someone who's never had to earn a seat at any table. Sabrina cleared her throat, a delicate little cough that somehow still managed to sound like a gavel demanding attention, and the table quieted down. Someone off camera, probably her assistant or one of her minions because Sabrina definitely has minions, adjusted the phone to get a better angle. The comments section was already filling up with people saying things like, "Gorgeous fam," and "so elegant," and I wondered if any of these people knew they were essentially applauding my exclusion. "Hi everyone," Sabrina said, waving at the camera with that pageant wave that probably comes with its own trademark. "We're here having our pre-voyage dinner, a tradition we started years ago. Try 2 years ago, and it was my idea, but sure, let's rewrite history while we're rewriting guest lists." She continued, her voice taking on that practiced tone she uses when she's about to say something she thinks is profound but is actually just pretentious. "This trip means so much to us because it's not just about luxury or leisure, though we certainly appreciate both." Polite laughter from the table, perfectly timed like they'd rehearsed it. "It's about surrounding ourselves with people who truly understand and represent the Preston family legacy." I actually laughed out loud at that, a sharp bark of laughter that made me spill some of my overpriced dear beer on my shirt. "Legacy," I said to my empty living room, because at this point I was apparently the kind of person who talks to himself. Their biggest legacy is passive aggression and bad investment advice. But I kept watching, because apparently, I'm also a masochist. Sabrina was still going, really warming up to her theme now. "We only bring those who truly represent what this family stands for. People who share our values, our vision, our commitment to excellence and authenticity." Authenticity. This woman was talking about authenticity while deliberately excluding her sister's husband from a family trip on his own boat. The irony was so thick you could package it and sell it at Whole Foods for $29 a pound. "We've been so blessed," she continued, and I watched Lauren nod along like this made perfect sense, like her sister wasn't currently describing criteria for attendance that I apparently didn't meet. "Blessed with success, with each other, with opportunities to create these incredible memories together." Blake raised his glass at this point, of course he did, and said something I couldn't quite hear, but that made everyone laugh. I rewound the video, turned up the volume, and caught it on the second playthrough. "To family, however we define it. However we define it. As in, not including Darren, because Darren doesn't fit our definition." The comments kept rolling in, hundreds of them now, people I'd never heard of weighing in with their support and admiration. "Squad goals," wrote someone named Ashley with 3 heart emojis. "This is what family should look like," added a user called Lifestyle Lover 2024. I wanted to comment, wanted to write something like, "Hey, fun fact, the guy who owns that yacht you're about to sail on isn't invited, but I'm not quite at the level of petty where I'll air family drama in Instagram comments yet." I screenshotted the video, captured Sabrina mid-speech with her mouth open in what could generously be called an unflattering expression, and opened up a new document on my laptop. I'd started keeping what I was calling the evidence files, a collection of screenshots, emails, texts, and documents that proved exactly what was happening here. It was probably excessive. It was definitely the behavior of someone who was planning something. But at this point, I was past caring about whether I looked crazy. I transcribed Sabrina's speech word for word, highlighted the particularly damning parts, those who truly represent the family legacy, our values, commitment to excellence, and authenticity, and saved it in a file I labeled Exhibit A, Queen of Delusion. Marcus would probably tell me I was spiraling. Lauren would definitely tell me I was being dramatic. My therapist, if I had one, would probably suggest I was processing rejection in an unhealthy way. But here's the thing they would all miss. I wasn't spiraling. I was documenting. There's a difference. Spiraling is emotional and chaotic. Documentation is methodical and purposeful. I was being purposeful. The live stream continued for another 15 minutes, during which various family members said things that ranged from boring to insulting. Uncle Robert talked about maintaining standards in that way that men of a certain age talk when they want to sound wise, but are actually just repeating things they heard on cable news. Cousin Jennifer shared some story about the importance of keeping your circle small and meaningful, which I'm sure had nothing to do with my exclusion and was completely coincidental timing. Then Ophelia, the family matriarch who'd always been relatively nice to me in that distant way that rich people are nice to service workers, raised her glass. To family, she said simply. To those who matter. To those who matter. I took another screenshot, added it to my file, and felt something shift inside me. Not quite anger anymore, not quite hurt. Something colder and more calculating. Something that felt a lot like resolve. Lauren came home around 10, smelling like expensive wine and Marcello's garlic bread. She found me on the couch, laptop open, surrounded by what probably looked like the research materials of a man planning either a lawsuit or a breakdown. "You're still up," she said, stating the obvious in that way people do when they don't know what else to say. "Watched your dinner live stream," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Looked fun." She had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Darren, it was just a family thing." "Yeah," I interrupted, closing my laptop with a decisive click. I know exactly what kind of family thing it was. I went upstairs without saying anything else, leaving her standing in the living room with whatever excuse she'd been about to offer. I didn't want excuses anymore. Didn't want explanations or justifications or the careful verbal gymnastics of people trying to make the indefensible sound reasonable. I wanted something better. I wanted proof. I wanted justice. And more than anything, I wanted to see the look on Sabrina's face when she realized that the person she'd excluded from the family legacy was actually the person who'd paid for it. That night, lying in bed while Lauren showered, I pulled out my phone one more time and looked at those screenshots, at Sabrina's face frozen in that moment of self-righteous proclamation, at the table full of people who'd apparently decided I didn't represent their values or their vision or whatever other bullshit criteria they'd invented to justify my exclusion. "You want to talk about legacy?" I whispered to the screenshot. "Let's talk about legacy. Let's talk about who actually built something here. 3 days until departure. 3 days to get everything in order. 3 days until I showed up and reminded every single one of them exactly whose boat they were sailing on. There's a particular kind of satisfaction that comes from preparing for battle, and I don't mean the kind of battle where people throw punches or yell dramatic speeches in the ring. I mean the civilized, devastating, paperwork-based kind of warfare that middle-aged men excel at. The kind where your weapons are manila folders and your battle cry is, 'I have documentation.'" It was Friday morning, the day before the yacht was scheduled to depart, and while the Preston family was presumably packing designer swimwear and enough sunscreen to protect them from both UV rays and accountability, I was in my home office packing something far more powerful, evidence. I'd pulled every single document related to the yacht purchase. The original sales agreement with my signature, just mine, because Lauren hadn't even been at that first meeting with Craig, the over-Cologne broker. The wire transfer receipts showing money moving from my business account to Wavecrest Charter Services. The insurance documents listing me as the primary owner. The registration papers. The maintenance records with my credit card charges. The slip rental agreement at the marina. Every single piece of paper that proved what I already knew, but everyone else seemed to have conveniently forgotten. That yacht was mine. Jerry, my accountant, had come through like the beautiful, boring man he is. He'd sent over a comprehensive financial breakdown that traced every dollar of the yacht's purchase price back to my company profits. He'd even included a helpful timeline showing that the purchase was made 3 months before Lauren and I got married, which technically made it my premarital asset. I'd kissed that timeline, actually pressed my lips to the paper like it was a long-lost lover. That's where I was mentally at this point. I organized everything chronologically, then alphabetically, then by importance, because apparently when I'm having a psychological break, I cope by becoming extremely organized. Each document went into a clear plastic sleeve, the good ones from Staples, not the cheap ones that fog up, and then into a leather portfolio that I'd bought specifically for this occasion. A portfolio that said, "I'm serious about this," without saying, "I'm unhinged," which was a delicate balance I was trying to maintain. My printer had been working overtime for the past 2 days. I'd gone through 3 ink cartridges, which cost approximately $1 million each because printer ink is apparently made from liquid gold and the tears of angels. But it was worth it. Every page that came out was another piece of armor, another shield against the narrative that Sabrina had been building for years. I even ironed some of the documents. Actually set up the ironing board in my office and pressed creases out of papers like I was preparing formal wear for the Oscars. Marcus called during this process, and when I told him what I was doing, there was a long silence on the other end. "You're ironing legal documents," he finally said. "Presentation matters," I replied, running the iron over a bank statement with the kind of focus usually reserved for defusing bombs. "Man, you've officially lost it." "No," I corrected him, holding up a perfectly smooth ownership deed to the light like I was checking currency for counterfeits. "I've officially found it. There's a difference." Lauren discovered me around noon, sitting at my desk surrounded by stacks of papers organized with a precision that would make a librarian weep with joy. She stood in the doorway of my office for a full minute before saying anything, just watching me label folders with my label maker, another recent purchase that I was getting far too much satisfaction from. "What are you doing?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew and wasn't thrilled about it. "Packing," I said simply, pressing the label maker trigger and watching it spit out a perfectly formatted label that read, "Proof of Ownership, YCHD." "That's not packing, Darren. That's..." She gestured vaguely at my organized chaos. "That's building a case file." "Potato, potato," I said, carefully applying the label to a folder. "You pack your way, I'll pack mine." She walked into the office, picked up one of the documents, the wire transfer showing $847,000 leaving my account, and studied it like she was seeing it for the first time. Maybe she was. Maybe she'd never actually looked at the financials, never bothered to trace the paper trail that led from my bank account to that beautiful boat. "Darren," she said, and her voice had that quality that meant she was about to try to talk me down from something. "Don't do anything dramatic." I looked up from my labeling, met her eyes, and laughed. Actually laughed, a real one. This time, not the bitter bark I'd been doing lately. "Dramatic?" I repeated. "Lauren, I'm not planning to hire a skywriter or crash through a wall like the Kool-Aid Man. I'm not bringing fireworks or a marching band. I'm bringing facts. Documented, verified, legally binding facts." "You're going to make a scene," she said quietly. "No," I corrected her, standing up and walking over to where she stood holding evidence of my investment in what was supposed to be our shared life. "Sabrina made a scene when she excluded me from a family trip on my own boat. I'm just going to provide context." She set the paper down carefully, like it might explode. "This is going to make everything worse." "Worse than what?" "Worse than being told I don't represent the family legacy? Worse than being replaced by Blake, who thinks cryptocurrency is a personality trait? Worse than watching my own wife go along with my exclusion because it's easier than standing up to her sister?" That last one hit hard. I could see it in her face, the way she flinched like I'd slapped her. And maybe it was a low blow, maybe I was being unfair, but I was past the point of caring about fairness. Fairness had left the building around the same time my yacht invitation had been canceled. "I tried," she said, and her voice cracked slightly. "I talked to Sabrina." "Oh, you talked to her?" I interrupted, feeling my voice rise despite my best efforts to stay calm. "You talked to her and what?" She said, "Sorry, no room for Darren." "And you said, okay, sounds good?" It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. I was full-on yelling now, something I rarely did, something that felt both terrible and cathartic. "You either stand up for your husband or you don't." You either tell your sister that excluding me is unacceptable, or you grab your designer beach bag and hop on my yacht without me. Those are the options, Lauren. There's no middle ground here. She was crying now, silent tears running down her face, and part of me, the part that had loved her for 15 years, that had bought a yacht partially because it made her happy, wanted to comfort her. But a bigger part, the part that had been humiliated and excluded and treated like an inconvenient accessory to her family narrative, wanted her to sit in this discomfort for a minute. I'm going, I said, turning back to my desk and picking up my leather portfolio, now full of perfectly organized, impeccably ironed documentation. I'm going to the marina tomorrow, and I'm getting on that yacht, and I'm going to remind everyone there exactly who owns what. Please, she whispered, and I wasn't even sure what she was asking for. Please don't go. Please don't make a scene. Please let this whole situation magically resolve itself without anyone having to face consequences. I booked a car service while she stood there watching. Not an Uber, not a Lyft, but an actual professional car service with a driver in a suit. Because if I was going to show up and reclaim my property, I was going to do it with a little style. The reservation confirmation came through my email with a satisfying ding, scheduled for 9 a.m. the next morning. Early enough to arrive before they departed, late enough that everyone would already be there to witness it. I spent the rest of the afternoon rehearsing, not out loud. I'm not completely unhinged, but in my head, running through different scenarios. What I'd say if Sabrina tried to stop me. How I'd respond if Blake made some smug comment. The exact facial expression I'd maintain when they all realized what was happening. I wanted calm. I wanted collected. I wanted the kind of controlled devastation that comes from being absolutely right and having the receipts to prove it. That evening, Lauren and I ate dinner in silence. She'd made lasagna, which was my favorite, and I wondered if it was a peace offering or just a coincidence. I ate it mechanically, tasting nothing, thinking only about the next morning and the look on Sabrina's face when she realized she'd played herself. After dinner, I went back to my office and added one more document to my portfolio. A printed copy of Sabrina's Instagram post, the one with the champagne glasses and the caption about people who matter most. I slid it into a plastic sleeve and placed it right at the front of my folder, where it would be the first thing anyone saw. If Sabrina wanted a show, if she wanted to make this about family legacy and values and who belonged and who didn't, then fine. I was about to premiere season finale energy, complete with plot twists, dramatic reveals, and the kind of climax that makes people say, "Oh, damn," out loud. I looked at my perfectly organized portfolio, my ironed documents, my labeled folders, and I smiled. Not a nice smile. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that sharks probably wear when they spot something bleeding in the water. "See you at the marina, Sabrina," I said to my empty office. "Hope you packed your receipts." Saturday morning arrived with the kind of aggressive cheerfulness that only Southern California can produce. Blue skies so bright they felt personally offensive, sunshine that seemed determined to mock my emotional state, and temperatures that demanded you have a good time whether you wanted to or not. It was 8:47 a.m. when my town car pulled up to the marina, 13 minutes ahead of schedule, because if you're going to reclaim your dignity and your property, punctuality matters. The driver, whose name was Raymond according to the placard on his dashboard, gave me a look in the rearview mirror as I sat in the back, clutching my leather portfolio like it was a life vest. "Big day, sir?" he asked, with the kind of polite interest that professional drivers perfect, engaged enough to seem human, detached enough to maintain boundaries. "You could say that," I replied, watching the marina entrance get closer. "I'm about to crash a party I was uninvited to on a boat I own. So yeah, pretty big." Raymond nodded slowly, like this made perfect sense to him, like maybe he drove people to dramatic confrontations all the time. "Want me to wait?" he asked. "In case you need a quick exit?" I considered it for a moment, imagining various scenarios where I'd need to flee the scene. But no, I wasn't leaving. Not this time. "Thanks, but I'm planning to stay for the whole show." The marina parking lot was already full of expensive cars, Mercedes, BMWs, a Tesla that probably belonged to Blake because of course it did. I could see people milling around near Dock C where the yacht was moored, could hear the distant sound of laughter and champagne bottles being opened, that particular frequency of wealthy people having a good time that always sounds slightly performative, like they're laughing for an audience even when nobody's watching. I paid Raymond, tipped him generously because my impending confrontation wasn't his problem, and stepped out into the aggressive sunshine with my portfolio under my arm. I was wearing khakis and a polo shirt. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed, "I'm making a statement," but pressed and clean and exactly the kind of thing a boat owner would wear. Comfortable, confident, casual in the way that people who belong places are casual. The walk from the parking lot to dock felt both endless and too short, like my brain couldn't decide whether it wanted to speed up time or slow it down. I could see the yacht now, could see its white hull gleaming in the sun like a beacon of my financial investment and emotional betrayal. People were already on board. I could see figures moving around on the deck, could hear music playing, some top 40 song about summer and freedom and not having your family treat you like garbage. That's when Sabrina spotted me. She was standing on the dock next to the boarding ramp, holding a clipboard because apparently she'd appointed herself cruise director of this disaster. She was wearing white linen pants and a blue striped shirt that probably cost more than my car payment, oversized sunglasses perched on her head like a tiara, looking every inch like someone who belonged on a yacht that she didn't own. I watched her face change as she recognized me walking toward her. It was like watching time-lapse footage of weather changing. First confusion, then recognition, then that jaw-tightening thing she does when she's about to engage in conflict but wants to maintain her composure. She said something to the woman next to her. I think it was cousin Jennifer, and then started walking toward me with the kind of purposeful stride that meant she was preparing to intercept a threat. We met about 20 feet from the boarding ramp, close enough that people on the yacht could see us, but far enough that they couldn't hear our conversation yet. The tactical positioning wasn't lost on me. Sabrina wanted to handle this quietly, wanted to make me disappear before I became a visible problem. "Darren," she said, and her voice had that carefully modulated sweetness that Southern women use when they're about to destroy you. Like poison wrapped in honey. "What are you doing here?" I adjusted my portfolio under my arm and smiled at her. Not friendly, but not hostile either. Neutral. Professional. The smile of a man who holds all the cards and knows it. "Morning, Sabrina. Beautiful day for a boat trip, isn't it?" Her smile tightened into something that barely qualified as a facial expression. "Darren, we discussed this. You're not on the list." She held up her clipboard like it was a legal document, like having my name absent from her little chart meant something in the real world. "Interesting," I said, not moving from my spot, because I don't remember receiving any official notification about guest lists. Just that text about the mix-up. I made air quotes around the word mix-up, and I could see her jaw clench even tighter. Behind her, I could see people starting to notice the confrontation. Uncle Robert was leaning over the railing, squinting in our direction. Blake had appeared on the deck, looking confused in that way that seemed to be his natural state. And there was Lauren, standing near the salon door, her hand over her mouth, like she was watching a car accident in slow motion. "This is a family trip," Sabrina said, lowering her voice to what she probably thought was a reasonable tone, but actually sounded more like a hiss. "We've been very clear about who's invited and who isn't. I'm sorry if there was any confusion, but you need to go home." "Go home," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air between us. "You want me to go home while you take a trip on my yacht?" That's when her mask slipped a little. "The family yacht," she corrected automatically, then seemed to realize what she'd just revealed. "Right?" I said, my smile growing wider. "The family yacht. Let's talk about that, shall we? Let's talk about which family member actually purchased this vessel. Let's discuss whose name is on the original ownership documents. Let's review who made the wire transfer for," I paused for effect, $847,000 to Wavecrest Charter Services on August 15th, 7 years ago. Sabrina's face had gone from fake pleasant to genuinely pale. "That's not. Lauren's name is on the papers. As co-owner, added later for tax purposes." I interrupted, and God, it felt good to interrupt her for once. "But the purchase? The original transaction? That was all me. Would you like to see the receipts?" "Because I brought them." I patted my portfolio, and I swear I saw her eyes flicker to it like it might explode. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "You're making a scene." "Not yet," I said pleasantly, "but I'm about to." I walked past her, and she actually grabbed my arm, her manicured hand wrapping around my bicep, like she could physically stop me. "Darren," she hissed, "if you get on that boat, you'll regret it." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back up at her face. Sabrina, I said quietly, I already regret letting you treat me like an inconvenience for 7 years. Getting on my own boat, that's not something I'm going to regret. She let go, and I continued walking toward the boarding ramp. I could feel everyone watching now, could sense the conversation stopping, the music seeming to fade into the background. This was it, the moment of truth. The dramatic entrance I'd been rehearsing in my head for 2 days. I reached the bottom of the boarding ramp where Miguel, one of the regular crew members who I'd tipped generously on multiple occasions, was standing in his crisp navy blazer with the Wavecrest logo on the breast pocket. He'd been checking names off a list, Sabrina's list, but when he saw me, his face broke into a genuine smile. "Mr. Coley," he said, loud enough that everyone on deck could hear. "Welcome aboard, sir. It's good to see you." The silence that followed was so thick you could butter toast with it. You could have packaged that silence and sold it as insulation. It was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring, that makes you hyper-aware of every ambient sound. The water lapping against the hull, a seagull crying somewhere overhead, someone's champagne glass being set down a little too hard. Miguel continued, bless his professional heart, completely oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the tension. "Captain Rodriguez asked me to let him know as soon as the owner arrived. I'll radio him right now. Your usual cabin is prepared, sir." The owner. The words hung in the air like a verdict. I looked up at the deck where the entire Preston family plus assorted hangers-on were now staring at me with varying expressions of shock, confusion, and in Sabrina's case, dawning horror. Blake's mouth was actually hanging open, which improved his appearance significantly because at least he wasn't talking. I climbed the boarding ramp slowly, deliberately, maintaining eye contact with Sabrina the entire time. When I reached the deck, I turned to give her a slow nod, the kind of acknowledgement you give someone who's just realized they've made a catastrophic error in judgment. "Guess my seat got confirmed after all," I said, just loud enough for everyone to hear. If you've never experienced the pure, unfiltered schadenfreude of watching someone's carefully constructed narrative implode in real time on social media, let me tell you, it's better than therapy, cheaper than drugs, and more satisfying than finally getting that popcorn kernel unstuck from your teeth after 3 days. And I was about to get a front row seat to the most beautiful disaster I'd ever witnessed. The first hour after I boarded was what I can only describe as aggressively awkward. People didn't know how to act around me. Do they acknowledge the elephant in the room, or do they pretend everything is normal? Most chose option B, giving me tight smiles and even tighter small talk, while carefully avoiding the central question of wait. So who actually owns this boat? Uncle Robert, who'd spent the last 3 Thanksgivings explaining to me why my business wasn't real entrepreneurship because it involved logistics instead of, I don't know, disrupting markets or whatever buzzword he'd learned from his latest podcast, suddenly found himself very interested in examining the yacht's safety equipment. Cousin Jennifer, who'd posted that comment about keeping your circle small and meaningful, was suddenly deeply invested in her phone, scrolling with the intensity of someone trying to become one with their device. Lauren found me about 20 minutes in, standing near the bow railing where I was watching the marina crew prepare for departure. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in the last hour, which I would have felt bad about if I wasn't still riding the high of my dramatic entrance. "That was," she started, then seemed to realize she didn't actually know how to finish that sentence. "Necessary," I offered. "Overdue?" "Extremely satisfying." "I was going to say a lot," she said quietly, standing next to me, but not quite close enough to touch. "Everyone's talking." "Good," I said, and I meant it. Let them talk. Maybe they'll finally discuss something honest for once instead of pretending everything's perfect while treating people like garbage. She didn't respond to that, just stood there looking out at the water like it might offer her some answers. I almost felt bad for her, caught between her family and her husband, between the narrative they'd built and the reality I was forcing them to confront. Almost. That's when I noticed Renee Martinez leaning against the salon entrance, watching the whole scene unfold with the barely contained glee of someone who'd just stumbled onto the story of the year. Renee was a journalist I'd met years ago at a business networking event, back when I still thought networking events might be useful for something other than collecting business cards you'll never use. She'd covered some stories about small business growth in the region, had interviewed me once about logistics industry trends, and we'd stayed friendly in that casual way that people do when they genuinely like each other but don't have enough in common to be close friends. What I hadn't known until she waved at me from across the deck was that she'd somehow ended up on this trip. Probably as Melissa's plus one. They'd been dating on and off for the past year, though nobody in the family officially acknowledged it because apparently Melissa having a girlfriend was less acceptable to the Prestons than Melissa having no personality. Renee made her way over to us, and I could see Lauren tense up slightly. Renee had that energy that made people nervous, not aggressive, but observant, like she was always 3 steps ahead of whatever conversation you thought you were having. "Darren," she said, grinning in a way that told me she'd figured out exactly what was happening and was here for all of it. "Interesting morning." "You could say that," I replied, matching her grin. "Glad you could make it to the show." Lauren excused herself, literally said, "Excuse me," and walked away, leaving me and Renee standing by the railing. The yacht's engines rumbled to life below us, that deep thrumming sound that usually made me happy, but today just felt like the soundtrack to chaos. "So," Renee said, pulling out her phone and pretending to check something while actually positioning it to record our conversation. "Want to give me the real story? Because the official version seems to be missing some key details. I probably should have been more careful. Should have played it closer to the vest, maintained some dignity, kept my mouth shut. But I was running on approximately 48 hours of righteous anger and spite, fueled by overpriced beer and the sweet taste of vindication. So instead, I told her everything. The exclusion, the texts, the cabin cancellation, the ownership documents currently sitting in my portfolio in my cabin. All of it." She listened with the focused attention of a predator spotting wounded prey, occasionally asking clarifying questions, her eyes getting wider with each new detail. "This is insane," she said when I finished. "This is absolutely insane. Sabrina excluded you from a trip on your own yacht. Co-owned with my wife." I corrected, because accuracy matters even in pettiness. "But purchased entirely with my money, yes." "Does she know you're talking to me?" Renee asked, glancing around the deck where Sabrina was holding court near the stern, surrounded by her usual audience of people who laughed at her jokes even when they weren't funny. "Does it matter?" I asked, and Renee's grin got even wider. That's when Sabrina made her fatal mistake. She decided, in her infinite wisdom and complete lack of awareness, that this was the perfect time to go live on Instagram. Again, because apparently, one live stream where she'd excluded me wasn't enough. She needed to document my presence on the yacht while still trying to maintain her narrative that this was her show. I watched her set up the shot, watched her gather a small crowd of family members around her, watched her check her makeup in her phone's front-facing camera before flipping it around to start the stream. The little live indicator popped up on her screen, visible even from where I stood about 20 feet away. "Oh, this is going to be good," Renee muttered next to me, and she wasn't wrong. Sabrina's voice carried across the deck, amplified by that projection she probably learned in some public speaking class for aspiring CEOs. "Hi everyone, we're officially setting sail." She panned the camera around to show the marina receding behind us, the water, the blue sky, the whole aesthetic package that screamed luxury lifestyle influencer. Nothing like family, loyalty, and luxury on the open sea. So blessed to be surrounded by the people who truly get what this legacy means. There it was again. Legacy. That word she loved so much. That concept she'd built her entire identity around. Even though her personal legacy so far consisted of a failed marriage, a consulting business that seemed to consist entirely of having coffee meetings, and an Instagram feed full of inspirational quotes about success from people who'd actually achieved things. The comments section on her live stream was already filling up with the usual suspects, her followers dropping heart emojis and gorgeous and living your best life. I could see it all because Renee had pulled up the stream on her phone and was watching it with barely suppressed glee. That's when Carlos, one of the crew members, walked directly behind Sabrina carrying a tray of fresh towels. He was new. I'd only met him once before, during a maintenance check last month, but he recognized me from the crew briefing where Captain Rodriguez always showed photos of the owner and primary guests. Carlos saw me standing on the far side of the deck, gave me a respectful nod, and then said, clearly and loud enough to be picked up on Sabrina's phone microphone, Glad to have you aboard again, sir. Owner's orders. Owner's orders. 2 words. 6 syllables. The nuclear option. I watched Sabrina freeze mid-sentence. Her smile locked in place like her facial muscles had suddenly stopped receiving signals from her brain. The phone in her hand didn't move, still live streaming, still broadcasting to however many thousand followers she had. And I could see the exact moment she realized what had just been said and, more importantly, what had just been heard. The comments section exploded. I mean, absolutely detonated. Renee turned her phone toward me, so I could see the chat scrolling by at warp speed. Wait, what? Did he say owner? Who's the owner? I'm so confused. Is that guy in the background the owner? OMG plot twist. Someone explain what's happening. This is better than reality TV. Sabrina tried to recover, tried to keep talking about the trip and the family and the legacy, but her voice had lost all its confidence. She sounded like someone trying to give a presentation after forgetting all their notes, and also possibly forgetting how to speak English. She stumbled through another sentence about togetherness and special moments before abruptly ending the stream with a shaky, "Talk to you all later." The damage was done, though. Renee was already checking Twitter. Yes, people still use Twitter, apparently, or X, or whatever we're calling it this week, where clips from the live stream were already being shared. Someone had screen recorded the moment Carlos walked by. Someone else had created a side-by-side comparison of Sabrina's pre-trip live stream, where she'd talked about people who represent the family, next to this one where she'd been exposed. It's trending, Renee said, showing me her phone where hashtag Yacht drama was climbing the trending topics. Not nationally or anything, but definitely locally. This is going to be everywhere by dinner. I should have felt bad. Should have felt guilty about the public humiliation, about the way Sabrina's carefully curated image was currently being dissected by strangers on the internet. But I didn't. I felt satisfied. I felt vindicated. I felt like maybe, finally, the truth was worth more than the comfortable lie. Sabrina had retreated into the salon, her phone clutched to her chest like a shield that had failed to protect her. Blake followed her, looking confused and concerned in equal measure, which was probably the most genuine emotion I'd ever seen him display. I raised my glass of water. I was staying sober for this, wanted to remember every second with crystal clarity, in Renee's direction. "To honest captions," I said. She clinked her phone against my glass, laughing. "To the truth coming out, even when it's inconvenient." "Especially when it's inconvenient," I corrected. The yacht continued its path out of the marina, toward open water, carrying a family whose carefully constructed narrative was currently sinking faster than the Titanic. And I was right there on deck, watching it all unfold, feeling like maybe, just maybe, I'd finally stopped being a supporting character in my own life. Dinner that night was served in the yacht's main salon, which under normal circumstances was one of my favorite spaces on the entire vessel. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic ocean views, custom teak table that sat 12 comfortably, ambient lighting that cost more than most people's cars, and made everyone look like they were starring in their own personal cologne commercial. It was designed for elegant entertaining, for memorable meals, for the kind of sophisticated gatherings where people discuss wine pairings and vacation homes in Tuscany. What it was not designed for was the level of concentrated awkwardness currently filling the space like toxic gas. The chef, Pierre, who I'd personally hired 3 years ago, and who made a duck confit that could make you weep, had prepared what should have been an incredible meal. Seared scallops to start, followed by herb-crusted lamb with roasted vegetables, and some kind of chocolate situation for dessert that probably had a French name I couldn't pronounce. Michelin star quality, served on china that cost more per plate than my first car. And absolutely nobody was enjoying it. Sabrina sat at one end of the table, picking at her scallops like they'd personally offended her, her face still carrying that shell-shocked expression from the livestream disaster. She'd changed clothes since this afternoon, now wearing a silk blouse that probably cost enough to feed a small village. But no amount of designer fabric could hide the fact that she looked like someone who'd just watched their carefully constructed world crumble in high definition. Blake sat next to her, eating with the focused intensity of someone who desperately wanted to be anywhere else, but didn't know how to politely excuse himself from a moving yacht. Every few minutes he'd pat Sabrina's hand in what I assumed was meant to be comforting, but looked more like he was checking to make sure she hadn't turned to stone. Lauren was 3 seats down from me, close enough that we were technically eating together, but far enough that it felt symbolic. She'd barely touched her food, just pushed it around her plate in that way that people do when they're too stressed to eat but don't want to draw attention to not eating. Every so often she'd glance at me with this expression that was part pleading, part resignation, like she knew something was coming but hoped maybe if she didn't acknowledge it, it wouldn't happen. Ophelia, the family matriarch who'd been conspicuously quiet since my dramatic boarding this morning, sat at the opposite end of the table from Sabrina. She was 73, built like a bird, and had the kind of old money composure that came from generations of people who'd never had to worry about things like grocery store coupons or whether their car would start in the morning. She'd always been relatively civil to me, in that distant way that wealthy people are civil to those they consider beneath them, but too well-mannered to be openly rude to. The rest of the table was filled with the usual suspects: Uncle Robert, Cousin Jennifer, Melissa, and Renee, a few other family members whose names I honestly couldn't remember in that moment because I was too focused on what I was about to do. They all ate in near silence, the only sounds being silverware against plates and the occasional murmur of someone asking for the salt or commenting on the food with the enthusiasm of hostages reading scripted lines. I'd placed my leather portfolio on the empty chair next to me, visible enough that people kept glancing at it like it might contain nuclear launch codes or evidence of war crimes. Which, in a way, it kind of did. Evidence of the crime of excluding someone from their own property, evidence of years of casual disrespect, evidence that the entire family narrative was built on convenient amnesia. We were halfway through the main course when I decided it was time. I could have waited until dessert, could have let them finish their meal in peace, could have been the bigger person. But being the bigger person had gotten me exactly nowhere for the past 7 years, so I figured it was time to try being the person with receipts instead. I stood up, and the scraping of my chair against the floor was loud enough that everyone stopped eating and looked at me. Some with curiosity, some with dread, Sabrina with the kind of panic usually reserved for people who've just realized they left the oven on before leaving for vacation. "Sorry to interrupt dinner," I said, and I wasn't sorry at all. "But I think we need to have a conversation we should have had a long time ago." "Darren," Lauren started, but I held up a hand. "No, it's okay," I said, keeping my voice calm and reasonable, the tone of a man who's about to drop truth bombs while maintaining plausible deniability about being aggressive. "Since we're all here, all together, on this lovely trip, I think it's the perfect time to clear some things up." I picked up my portfolio, opened it with the deliberate care of a lawyer presenting evidence in court, and placed it on the table in front of me. The first document on top was Sabrina's Instagram post, the one where she'd talked about family legacy and people who truly represent what the family stands for, printed in full color on glossy paper. "We've been hearing a lot about legacy lately," I continued, looking around the table at faces that ranged from confused to mortified. "About family values and who represents what and who belongs where. So I thought, since we're all so interested in legacy, maybe we should look at the actual paperwork. Get our facts straight." Sabrina had gone pale, that kind of pale that makes you wonder if someone needs medical attention or just a stiff drink. "This isn't appropriate," she said, her voice lacking all its usual authority. "You're right," I agreed, pulling out the next document, the original yacht purchase agreement. "It wasn't appropriate when you excluded me from a family trip. It wasn't appropriate when you canceled my cabin reservation. It wasn't appropriate when you live-streamed about family legacy while deliberately leaving out the person who paid for the boat you're sitting on. So yeah, we're way past appropriate at this point." I held up the purchase agreement so everyone could see it, even though most of them probably couldn't read it from their seats. But that wasn't the point. The point was the gesture, the visual proof, the physical manifestation of truth. "This is the original sales agreement for this yacht," I said. "Signed August 15th, 7 years ago. One signature. Mine. Not family. Not joint. Mine." I pulled out the next document, the wire transfer receipt. "This is the wire transfer showing $847,000 moving from my business account to Wavecrest Charter Services. Again, my account. My business. My money that I earned from 15 years of running a logistics company that apparently isn't real entrepreneurship, according to some people at this table." Uncle Robert suddenly found his lamb absolutely fascinating, studying it like it might contain the meaning of life. I continued pulling out documents, laying them on the table one by one like I was dealing cards in the world's most expensive poker game. Insurance papers, registration documents, maintenance records, each one another nail in the coffin of the family narrative. Lauren's name was added later, I said, looking at my wife who had tears in her eyes, but I was too far gone to care. For tax purposes, according to our accountant. Joint ownership on paper, but the purchase? The actual transaction? That was all me. Sabrina tried one more time to regain control, her voice shaky but attempting authority. We all know you contributed financially. Contributed? I interrupted, and I laughed, a sharp bark of laughter that made several people flinch. I didn't contribute, Sabrina. I bought it. Entirely. Completely. 100%. There was no contribution, no pooled family resources, no collective investment. It was me, my money, my decision. This is really not the time. Ophelia started, using that matriarchal tone that probably worked on everyone else, but wasn't going to work on me tonight. Oh, it's exactly the time, I said, turning to face her directly. Because apparently, I'm the only one who brought a receipt to a legacy party. Everyone else just brought assumptions and entitlement and a really impressive ability to rewrite history. I pulled out one final document, the email from Wavecrest confirming the cabin cancellation, processed by S. Preston. I held it up like it was Exhibit A in a murder trial. This is the confirmation that Sabrina personally canceled my reservation on my own boat, I said. Not a mix-up, not an oversight. A deliberate, documented decision to exclude me from a trip on property I own. The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the ocean outside, could hear the engines humming below, could probably hear people's blood pressure rising in real time. Sabrina's face had progressed from pale to red, that blotchy red that happens when embarrassment meets rage meets the dawning realization that you've thoroughly screwed up. You're making this into such a... what? I interrupted. A big deal? A scene? A problem? Yeah, I am. Because it is a big deal. Being excluded from your own property is a big deal. Being told you don't represent family values when you're literally the one who provided the venue for this family gathering is a big deal. I looked around the table, making eye contact with each person, watching them squirm in their expensive clothes on their expensive chairs on my expensive yacht. I'm not asking for inclusion anymore, I said quietly, and the quiet somehow made it more powerful than shouting would have been. I'm not begging for a seat at the table or hoping someone remembers to put me on the guest list. I'm asserting jurisdiction. This is my boat. These are my documents. This is my property that you've all been treating like community property because it was convenient and nobody bothered to check the receipts. I closed the portfolio with a decisive snap and picked it up, holding it against my chest like armor. So enjoy your dinner. Enjoy the trip. Enjoy the legacy. But remember who's actually providing it. If you've ever wondered what the morning after a nuclear confrontation feels like on a luxury yacht in the middle of the Pacific, let me paint you a picture. It's quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet that meditation apps try to sell you, but the uncomfortable quiet of people who'd witnessed something they couldn't unwitness and now had to figure out how to exist in the same confined space while pretending everything was totally fine. I woke up around 7, which was early for me, but my internal alarm clock had apparently decided that after dropping truth bombs the night before, I didn't deserve the luxury of sleeping in. The sun was streaming through the porthole of my cabin, the master stateroom. Thank you very much, because owner's privileges, and I could hear the gentle sound of water against the hull. I took my time getting ready, showering in the en-suite bathroom that had better water pressure than my house, getting dressed in shorts and a t-shirt that said Ohio across the chest, because I'm nothing if not committed to reminding these people of my deeply Middle American roots. I looked at myself in the mirror and thought, you did it. You stood up for yourself. You brought receipts to a fight that everyone else thought was just going to be polite conversation. Whether that made me brave or just petty was something I'd figure out later, probably in therapy. When I emerged and made my way to the upper deck where breakfast was being served, I half expected to find the place deserted. But no. There were people there, scattered around in small groups, eating croissants and fruit with the enthusiasm of mourners at a funeral where the deceased had died doing something embarrassing. The energy was different. The previous days had been filled with that performative family joy, that loud laughter and constant chatter. Now, People were speaking in hushed tones, moving carefully, glancing at me out of the corners of their eyes when they thought I wasn't looking. It was the vibe of a church on tax day, quiet, contemplative, and filled with people wondering if their mistakes were about to catch up with them. Uncle Robert was the first to approach me, and I'll give him credit for that. He walked over to where I was standing by the coffee station, pouring myself a cup of coffee that was way better than anything I could make at home. "Darren," he said, his voice missing all its usual bluster. "About last night. I didn't realize the full situation." I took a sip of my coffee, let him marinate in his discomfort. The full situation being that I own the yacht we're currently standing on. He had the decency to look embarrassed. "Yes, that. I may have made some incorrect assumptions about the family dynamics here." "May have," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Definitely have," he corrected. "I apologize. I should have been more aware." It wasn't exactly a heartfelt mea culpa, wasn't the kind of apology that erases years of casual dismissal, but it was something. I nodded, accepting it in the spirit it was offered. Awkward, uncomfortable, and about 3 years too late. "Appreciate that, Robert." Cousin Jennifer approached next, catching me while I was examining the navigation equipment on the bridge. She was wearing a sundress and an expression that suggested she'd drawn the short straw in some family meeting about who had to talk to me. "Darren, hi," she said, her voice unnaturally bright. "I just wanted to say that I think there may have been some miscommunication about the trip planning." "Miscommunication," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" She shifted uncomfortably. I didn't know all the details about the ownership situation. If I'd known, I would have said something. Would she have? I doubted it, but I was tired of being angry. "Thanks for saying so," I said, which was neither acceptance nor rejection, just acknowledgement that words had been spoken. She scurried away, leaving me alone with Captain Rodriguez, who'd been pretending to check instruments while clearly listening. "Interesting morning, Mr. Coley," he said with a hint of a smile. "That's one word for it," I replied. The person who notably didn't approach me was Sabrina. I caught glimpses of her throughout the morning. A flash of her hair disappearing around a corner, the sound of her voice behind a closed cabin door. She was hiding, and honestly, good. Let her sit in her cabin and Google, "Can emotional damage be tax deductible?" or whatever people like her Google when they realize they've catastrophically misjudged a situation. Blake had the unenviable task of being her emotional support human. I saw him carrying plates of food to her cabin, saw him on his phone probably fielding texts, looking more stressed than I'd ever seen him look. Around 10:30, I found a quiet spot on the bow and just sat. Watched the ocean, felt the sun on my face, listened to the sounds of a yacht cutting through water. For the first time in maybe a week, I felt something close to peace. That's when Lauren found me. She sat down next to me with enough distance that we weren't touching, but close enough that the intention to connect was clear. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both looking at the water, both trying to figure out what to say. "I knew," she finally said, her voice quiet. "Parts of it. I knew Sabrina had removed you from the guest list. I knew she'd canceled your cabin." I didn't respond immediately, just let her words sit there. "I told myself it would blow over," she continued, tears in her voice. "That making a big deal about it would just cause more problems. That peace was better than confrontation." I turned to look at her. Peace built on my silence. I said, "That's just censorship with better lighting." She flinched. "You're right," she said, crying now. "You're completely right. I chose the easy path. I chose not rocking the boat." She laughed bitterly at her own unintentional pawn. "Instead of standing up for you, I chose my family's comfort over your dignity." "Yeah," I said simply. "You did." We sat there in that truth for a while, letting it breathe. The ocean kept moving, the yacht kept sailing, and two people who'd promised to be partners sat together in the wreckage of broken trust, trying to figure out if there was anything worth salvaging. "I don't know if I can forgive that easily," I said eventually. "I'm not asking you to," Lauren replied. "I'm just sorry. Really, genuinely sorry. Not because you made a scene or because I'm embarrassed, but because you deserved better. You've always deserved better. It wasn't enough. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was a start, and starts are better than nothing." For the first time in what felt like years, I ate breakfast in actual peace. The omelette Pierre made wasn't even that great, slightly overcooked, the cheese not quite melted right. But freedom, Even the small freedom of eating breakfast on your own property without feeling like an intruder tasted better than any Michelin star meal ever could. 3 weeks later, I was hosting brunch at my house, the one Lauren and I actually owned together, with the mortgage we split and the lawn I mowed myself because hiring landscapers felt too fancy for a kid from Ohio. It wasn't on a yacht, wasn't catered by a chef named Pierre, and definitely wasn't going to end up as Instagram content for people who measure their self-worth in likes. It was small, honest, the kind of gathering where nobody had to perform. Renee showed up with croissants from that bakery downtown that always has a line because apparently waiting 45 minutes for bread is now a personality trait. My lawyer friend Martin came with his husband, ready to crack jokes about charging admission for front row seats to future family drama. Even Marcus showed up, bringing beer and commentary about how I'd really committed to the bit with the yacht confrontation. Lauren was there too, helping in the kitchen, quiet but present. We were rebuilding trust the way you rebuild anything that's been broken, slowly, carefully, with the understanding that some cracks never fully disappear, but you learn to live with them anyway. She'd started standing up to Sabrina more, setting boundaries, using the word no like it was a complete sentence. Progress looked different than I'd imagined, but it was still progress. While cleaning out my office the week before, I'd found an old note from my dad, tucked into a book I hadn't opened in years. His handwriting, shaky from the Parkinson's that eventually took him. Don't fight for a seat at someone else's table. Buy your own table. Better yet, build it. I'd laughed when I read it. That bittersweet laugh you do when you realize someone who's gone knew exactly what you'd need to hear years later. Dad never met Sabrina, never saw the yacht, never witnessed the family dynamics that made Thanksgiving feel like a hostage negotiation. But somehow he'd known. By the table, I'd bought the boat. Same principle, salter execution. The really interesting development came 2 days after the brunch when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was Ellie, Sabrina's niece, 24, smart as hell, and apparently trying to launch a tech startup focused on supply chain optimization. She wanted mentorship, wanted advice from someone who'd actually built something instead of just posting about building things. I said yes, because here's what I'd learned. Legacy isn't about blood or last names or who got invited to which yacht trip. Legacy is about impact, about helping people who actually want to learn, about building something that matters more than your own ego. When people asked about the yacht incident, because of course it became known as an incident, like it was a diplomatic crisis, I kept it simple, just reminded some folks about reading the fine print. Standing in my kitchen that morning, coffee in hand, watching people who actually gave a damn about me laugh and eat overpriced croissants, I had a realization that felt like the final scene of a movie where the protagonist finally gets it. They'd tried to erase me from the guest list. Now they were all just footnotes in my story. And that, honestly, was the best revenge I could have asked for.